Chaoye and Chaotang, Political Stratagem and Jianghu. I was originally a rebellious young minister, not believing in ghosts and gods or people. Hand-wielding 3 swords, 1 sword surpasses the immortal peak in the world, 1 sword roams freely in the rivers and lakes, and 1 sword startles the swans and brings joy and enmity. In those 10 years, Shaoyang finally encountered a mysterious demon calamity. If the moon never appears on this day, I will open countless tribulations. Keywords of the novel. Ending as a heavenly immortal with no pop-ups, ending as a heavenly immortal complete collection download, ending as the latest chapter of heavenly immortal reading. Chapter 1. The White Jade Capital in the Sky. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. The White Jade Capital in the Sky. Shaoyang Dynasty. Jingzhou, Fenyang City. At the foot of the suspended mountain, outside Jiuhua village. The dusk mist, trees, and yellowed branches and leaves paint a stunning scenery. As the sun sets, the distant moonlight rises, but the blood-red sunset has yet to leave. The flowing water under the mountain stream is murmuring, and the terrain is steep. Although living in the north, the suspended mountain area is located south of the Yellow River. It is humid all year round, with flowing sand splashing everywhere. The stone walls of the mountain have long been polished to be sandy and bright, which creates a natural danger for the surrounding medicinal gatherers. The surface of these stone walls feels rough to the touch, but only experienced herb miners understand that this is a natural trap. A thin layer of sand has formed on the stone wall. If you step on and remove this layer of sand, it will expose an incredibly smooth stone surface, making it unable to support and falling into the mountain stream, falling into turbulent water. So even if there are countless rare herbs here, no one will take the risk of dying to retrieve them. Even the immortals on the hanging mountain who can climb the eaves and walls will not risk losing their lives in vain. But there are always exceptions, and Baiyujing is that exception. Baiyujing is not in the sky, but on the cliff. At this moment, there was a rope coiled around his waist, and his entire body had fallen into a depression in the mountain stream. His feet were stepping on the surface of the rock, which was just right under the force. It did not damage the sand surface on the upper layer of the rock wall, but also kept his body balanced and evenly stressed. Only with this skill can he and his mother survive hunger. This is an individual effort, and even more so, a bold and meticulous job. Even a timid glance down is enough to make his legs weak in fear of the surging currents at a height of 100 zhang. However, at this moment, there is no worry on his face, and he even hums a unique tune from the north. With ease, he took out a short grass sickle with his left hand, lightly gouged out the roots of a tail of 9 leaf, 3 flower, and 5 whiskered herbs, and with a gentle shake of his wrist, the herbs entered the small frame tied to his wrist. Baiyujing excitedly glanced at it and thought to himself, in recent days, the price of Longzuko has risen for some reason. 1 tael can sell a few taels of silver, and today it's just the right time. This tael of 9 leaves, 3 flowers, and 5 beads is already mature. I estimate that it will cost 5 or 6 taels of silver anyway, which is enough to give to Director Xue. TSK, it's enough to make new clothes for my mother for 3 years. Baiyujing put away his sickle and glanced at the still dense herbs on the cliff. His gaze fell on the largest plant, the 9 leaves, 9 flowers, and 9 beads, which was the longshu grass. That is the grass king here. When Baiyujing discovered it, it was still a young seedling. Baiyujing did not pick it back then, but instead moved it from the slope, even the soil and seedlings, to this place. Perhaps it wanted to thank you, but now the entire cliff has grown Longzuko. This has also become the stable and only source of survival for Baiyujing. Baiyujing will not go to pick unless it is absolutely necessary. He is not a greedy person. Jumping up, he quickly climbed up the cliff in a few strokes, packing up the scattered tools and carrying them on his back. Before nightfall, he quickly set foot on the road to Fenyang City. The moon stars are thick, and the dusk is gradually coming to an end. The clear orioles are singing and cheering, and the mood of Baiyujing is just right. Every time he goes to Fenyang City, his mood is always very good. Being able to earn money is not a big deal, but seeing the Sword Immortal Temple is a big deal. Legend has it that 100 years ago, a peerless Sword Immortal appeared in Fenyang City. His swordsmanship was unparalleled in the world, and he was the only strong person who dared to be called an immortal at that time. Later, for some unknown reason, he chose to retire. This famous Sword Immortal was born in Fenyang City and eventually lived in seclusion, which turned this once remote city into a bustling and extraordinary city. The Hanging Mountain has also become a secluded fairyland of sword immortals, sought after by future generations. It is said that there are great opportunities hidden here. Up to now, no one in Fenyang City knows that there used to be a Sword Immortal here, and Baiyujing grew up listening to the story of the Sword Immortal. He resisted 3,000 demons to protect the people with his own strength. In World War I, the top 16 experts won in 10 days and 10 nights, and the Shaoyang dynasty defeated this Sword Immortal with just 3 moves. These legends, Baiyujing listened to them again and again, without getting tired of them. Every time he heard them, his heart would be filled with excitement and excitement. Every year on the 7th day of the 7th lunar month, Fenyang City holds a waiting ceremony and gathers in the Sword Immortal Temple to worship. He has become a fairy in the hearts of the people. Baiyujing also wants to become a Sword Immortal. To become an immortal, entering the Hanging Mountain Gate is the best way. Unfortunately, Baiyujing has not opened his meridian for 18 years. According to common sense, he is not a disciple of the immortal path, but he did not give up. Therefore, he used his skills to help these immortals collect the difficult-to-pick dragon-beard grass, in order to gain some favor. Hard work pays off for those who have a heart. He heard good news that every year, Hanging Mountain trades some immortal materials with other sects, including the opening pulse pill required for opening the pulse. This pill is expensive, but if there are acquaintances, it can be very cheap. Of course, Baiyujing has acquaintances. Fenyang City is not far from Jiuhua village, only a journey of over an hour. Baiyujing's goal is the Flower and Moon Tower, where sits a cultivator named Xueqin on the Hanging Mountain. He is several years older than him and used to be a villager of Jiuhua village. Because he discovered the immortal vein and naturally opened it, he was taken in by the Hanging Mountain and became a serious cultivator. One person gains the power of the rooster and the dog ascend to heaven. Xueqin took his parents to live in the city and bought a large mansion, completely freeing himself from his status as a poor farmer. Xueqin is his acquaintance. Every time Baiyujing sees him, a burning sense of envy arises in his heart. Hello. When Baiyujing arrived at the door of the Flower and Moon Tower, he was stopped by a light and agile voice. He turned his head and saw a lively and lovely girl. He smiled and greeted, Lin Dao Chang. I said, just call me Xie. What's not Dao Chang? Xing Fun. Lin Xie chuckled and pointed to the medicine basket in Baiyujing's hand. She pouted and said, is it Long Zuko again? Yeah. Baiyujing is not taboo. Lin Xie is also a Taoist on the Hanging Mountain. She came to Jiuhua village to search for Xueqin and had eaten at her own home. Later, Baiyujing picked medicine for Xueqin and naturally became familiar with him. Since she wanted to see it, Baiyujing didn't hide it and directly took out the herbs she had collected. Wow! 9 leaves and 3 flowers. 5 beads. Lin Xie didn't hide her surprised face at all. On her clean and spiritual face, she exclaimed, I'm afraid only you can pick this thing in Fenyang City. Can you sell it to me? I'll give you 10 taels of silver. 10 taels of silver. This silver is enough to make Baiyujing and the old lady eat meat every day for a year. But Baiyujing was not bought with this silver, instead he smiled and declined, saying, if Taoist still wants it, I will go up the mountain to pick it tomorrow. I will search again when the time comes. This tale has already been reserved by Taoist Xue. Lin Siye sighed and said, hey, this good thing is hard to find at all, and it's difficult for ordinary people to enter the mountains and streams in the air. Tomorrow. She seemed to have thought of something and said with a smile, tomorrow won't be too late. Just sell this to me and I'll pay. 13 taels. Although Bai Yujing was shocked, he quickly refused and shook his head, saying, Master Lin, being entrusted with loyalty is not a matter of money. Aren't you very short of money? 15 taels. This is the final price. Don't be insatiable. Lin Siye's face clearly turned ugly. Bai Yujing was worried about offending the Taoist priest on the mountain. After all, he still wanted to enter the hanging mountain and felt extremely uneasy. He whispered, Taoist Lin, I am very short of money, but... He was still trying to find a way to refuse Lin Siye when a hearty laugh echoed from behind, ha ha ha, senior sister is still so cute. She likes to joke with Xiao Bai. Bai Yujing finally breathed a sigh of relief. The true owner of this thing has arrived. Xue Kankai stood tall with a figure of a knowledgeable and rational Confucian scholar. He walked down with a folding fan, took out a bag of silver, and handed it to Bai Yujing. Brother, since you also know that this thing is valuable, and coupled with the shortage in the family during this period, I won't hide it from you. Take this silver, he said. Bai Yujing took the silver and did not count it. Instead, he respectfully handed the long zuko to Xue Kan and said, Xue Dao Chang, can you see if there is any problem? Xue Kan picked up the medicine basket and looked at it with a satisfied smile on his face. He said with satisfaction, not bad. Very good. It's been so hard this time, Xiao Bai. Bai Yujing scratched her head and said, if that's the case. He opened the silver bag and suddenly found that there were 10 taels of silver here. He quickly grabbed Xue Kan, who was about to leave, and said, Xue Dao Chang. The silver is not right. Xue Kan glanced at Lin Siye beside him, who also showed a sighing smile. He looked at Bai Yujing and said, okay, I'll provide you with more. No, 10 taels of silver is too much. We agreed on 5 taels, so that's 5 taels. An extra penny would be considered a violation of the rules. If you give me the silver, I will do my job, not because I sold this item to you. So how much it is worth has nothing to do with me. I'm not someone who is open-minded about money. Bai Yujing picked up the extra 5 taels of silver and handed it to Xue Kan. With the surprise on his and Lin Siye's faces, he flipped the silver bag in his hand and said, I can accept this silver bag. After all, it always contains broken silver, which is inconvenient to travel and always lost. If Xue Dao Chang doesn't mind, it will be considered a gift to me. Xue Kan and Lin Shi looked at each other on the moon, both puzzled, but suddenly smiled. In fact, Bai Yujing understood in his heart that he couldn't afford the favor of these people. He also wanted to use the extremely precious medicinal herb Kai Mai Dan, which was a great favor. Xue Kan promised to pay attention to Kai Mai Dan, which was already a great favor. How could he feel embarrassed to lose face for the few pieces of silver in front of him? Just as Bai Yujing was about to bid farewell, Xue Kan suddenly walked up to him with a stern expression and said, Brother Bai, it's already late now, and the monsters outside the city are rampant these days, which is very unsafe. It's not too late to take a night off before leaving. Just as Bai Yujing was about to refuse, Lin Siye beside her said with joy, oh by the way, it's going to be a season change. I guess Ent's clothes haven't been customized yet, right? With the money now, it's better to customize some. This winter may be even colder than usual. I happen to have a tailor shop that I know very well, and I'll invite you there. The boss will definitely give you a cheaper one for my sake. Bai Yujing let out a sigh and quickly thanked the two of them, intending to say, but my mother is still waiting for me to go home. But on second thought, my mother has been saying that her legs and feet are sore these days. I'm afraid it's because the weather has turned cold, so I made my own clothes and brought them back. My mother must be happy, so she nodded and agreed, don't bother Taoist Lin, I'll go on my own. Lin Xie smiled and said, okay, I'll guide you. Watching the excited Bai Yujing leave, Lin Xie finally returned to Xue Can's side and tilted her head, saying, can't you bear it? The smile on Xue Can's face slowly dissipated, and his expression sank. Master once said, what is lacking most in these years is not genius, but chivalry. He has chivalry in his heart, and I shouldn't let him die like this. Lin Xie smiled and said, I thought you were a conscientious discoverer, but in reality, you just wanted to alleviate your sins. Master wants the lives of all the people in Jiuhua village, so that they can use the demon-slaying formation and the corpse slave seal to gather their souls and easily defeat the enemy. Once you obtain the 8th rank demon pill, Master can be promoted to the 7th rank. You can let go of one person, but if there is more, I will report it. Xue Can sighed and laughed, pigs never understand until they die. The person who wields a sharp knife to kill them has nothing to do with the person who gives them 3 meals a day. Whatever protection they are given, they must be restricted. What can provide them with shelter from wind and rain can also make them invisible. I have no sin, the guilty one is the heavenly avenue. He brushed his sleeves and walked into the Flower Moon Tower without looking back. Lin Xie shook her head and said, you are indeed a good disciple of Master. The new book is on its way, please take good care of it. If you don't have any other skills, you'll end up with 10,000. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Demon Slaying Formation, Jiuhua Village, Hanging Mountain. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Demon Slaying Formation, Jiuhua Village, Hanging Mountain. The dusk has set, and the silver moon is like a hook. The bustling night has already begun in the bustling city of Fenyang, where the colorful girls are already busy with today's business on the streets. After selecting the fabric, no matter what Bai Yujing said, the tailor shop owner's son could only make it the next morning, which made him very helpless. In theory, cutting fabric and processing without the need for any decoration, such clothes can be made in less than half an hour, but the boss still refuses, saying that he is not feeling well. In the end, Bai Yujing had no choice but to buy the material and planned to go back and cut it for his mother. However, before leaving the store, the boss quickly grabbed his hand and said, Yujing, you can't take it back. Although Bai Yujing was puzzled, he still politely said, Boss son, I have been buying materials from your house for several years. Where in the world can there be a reason to sell fabrics without allowing anyone to take them away? Son, the shopkeeper, sighed and said, oh, well. It's going to snow on this horse. If you're on the road, it's not safe. Moreover, after nightfall, monsters run rampant. How can you walk around recklessly? If something happens to you, what should your mother do alone? I'm being polite to you, why are you cursing me like that? Bai Yujing suddenly became puzzled in her heart. Snow. He joked, boss, you've learned fortune-telling lately. You even know it's going to snow, right? Boss' son seemed to have realized that he had said the wrong thing, lowered his head, and quickly changed the topic. Oh, you see, I forgot. You've helped me find so many herbs over the years, you're a big expert. How could I forget about this? These days, some concentrated and peaceful spices have arrived. Please wait for me to find them. Let's burn them up and help me taste them. How about you? Speaking, Mr. Sun turned his head and rushed into the room. Bai Yujing wanted to stop him, but it was too late. He smiled and said to himself, the tailor's job at the Sun shopkeeper is delicate, and his hands are as steady as a knife. However, he didn't want to be so impatient, as if he was afraid of me going home. I'm not a gold job. Shaking his head and sighing, he had to sit in the hall, pick up a teacup, drink tea, and wait. Dang 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 dang. An elderly man over 50 years old walked into the door. He was tall and burly, but with a hunched waist and a heavy bundle in his hand, he secretly closed the door from inside. When he saw Bai Yujing, he immediately nodded and smiled. Bai Yujing didn't know who he was, but politely responded with a smile. You, the person leaned over to Bai Yujing and asked in a low voice, are you also called by Taoist Lin? Lin Dao Chang. Bai Yujing thought for a moment and said very naturally, are you talking about Lin Xia, the Taoist priest at the foot of the hanging mountain? It was she who brought me here. The visitor's face immediately changed, both surprised and delighted. My name is Wang Xuanfu, and I am a villager from Pangran village. Which village are you from? Bai Yujing thought for a moment and said, Pangransuan will have a 2-hour journey based on this. Why is this person still staying here? And why does the thing he is holding sound so much like silver? This person is very strange and cannot be truthfully released. He immediately said, I am the person in this city. Before Bai Yujing could finish thinking, Wang Xuanfu whispered, did you buy it for yourself? I bought it for my grandson. This batch of pills is really great. Bai Yujing had doubts in her heart, but she didn't say anything else directly. Instead, she calculated in her heart, Dan Yao. Children and grandchildren. Buy it yourself. What is this old man talking about? Is it a strange transaction? Thinking of immortals like Lin Xia, I naturally dared not touch too much, fearing that the other party would doubt me. I dispelled the idea of continuing to ask, but then I thought, pills. Is it difficult for cultivators to also sell pills to the outside world? Can it be the Kaimai pill? If it is the Kaimai pill, I can enter the immortal realm, take my mother to live in the city, avoid the trouble of farming, and enjoy a few years of happiness. Isn't it beautiful? Thinking of his mother, Bai Yujing felt warm and said, hey, Taoist Lin said he came to buy this pill urgently, but he didn't tell me about its other uses. Do you know, Wang Lao? Upon hearing this, Wang Xuanfu immediately showed a look of arrogance on his face and suppressed his throat, saying, you didn't know that this freshly baked pill not only helps people open their meridians and enter the Tao, but also prolongs their lives and frees them from the troubles of diseases. It can make their bodies, like those immortals, disease-free and disaster-free, greatly beneficial. Sure enough. Bai Yujing was overjoyed but also worried, since it's a pulse-opening pill, why didn't Shuekin tell me about this? Is it because it's too expensive this time? Or is there some other reason? I immediately had doubts about the price in my heart, glanced at the package in Wang Xuanfu's hand, and thought to myself, that broken silver looks a lot, at least it looks like 30.50 taels. I don't have that much silver. But if it doesn't work, I'll ask and exchange it for more Longzuko. So he said, Director Lin told you how much silver you need to bring. I have already brought 100 taels. Upon hearing this, Wang Xuanfu smiled foolishly and said, my friendship with Taoist Lin is not simple. You want 100 taels, but I don't want as much. But that's why I received this treatment because I did a good job. Bai Yujing pretended to be disdainful and said, I'm helping Taoist Lin pick herbs. What can you do that can match my treatment? Wang Xuanfu was greatly dissatisfied and immediately blurted out, I have drugged myself in the well of Jiuhua village. Tonight, they will be refined into corpse slaves, and the captured monsters will become this made opening pill, which can. Wang Xuanfu was speaking with great enthusiasm, but suddenly he was caught by Bai Yujing. The sudden shock shook his old body and silver spilled all over the ground. He wanted to break free, but unexpectedly saw Bai Yujing's eyes turning red and staring fiercely at him. His heart was filled with confusion, you. What's wrong with you? What are you talking about? Jiuhua village. What's wrong? Bai Yujing shouted. Son, the shopkeeper, ran out and saw this situation with great regret. He quickly stepped forward to dissuade him, Yujing, don't worry for now. This is not what he said. Bai Yujing turned his head and shouted, Manager son, do you also know? Son, the shopkeeper, sighed and said, Yujing, you can't handle this matter. Being able to save your life is already considered. I don't need you to save me. Jing had already let go of his hand and didn't believe everything he heard, but he had to believe it again. He immediately opened the wooden door and rushed out. Son, the shopkeeper, looked at the silver all over the ground and sighed, "Old Wang, you're just not strict with your mouth. You talk about everything outside. This child is already a good child. Look, isn't this commotion ruined?" Wang Xuanfu hugged his silver tightly and sneered, "Is he a good child? What does it matter to me? My grandson is truly a good child after tonight. You don't care about anything else. I'll ask you, when will this Kaimai pill arrive?" "Son," the shopkeeper said, "it's coming soon. When it's time to offer sacrifices, when it's time to kill, the Taoist priests in Hanging Mountain are all top-notch experts in the world. Naturally, it won't be too long. It's already time for Su Shi, and in 2 more hours, they will be able to become pills." "Okay." Wang Xuanfu sat on the chair, seeming that nothing had happened before, and exclaimed excitedly, "The damn people of Jiuhua village must be killed quickly, otherwise it will delay my grandson for 2 hours. Son, the shopkeeper, glanced at him, shook his head and sighed. He turned around and walked into the inner hall, only to find another piece of fabric that Jing had forgotten to take away on the table next to him. He picked up the fabric and shook his head helplessly, "Unfortunately, I can't put it on anymore. The moon is dark and the wind is high. Snow, slowly falling. Bright as day." The night, which had only been clear for thousands of miles, was now reflected by a layer of shimmering white snow. Jing ran wildly, unable to feel the cold, the pain of his feet being punctured by gravel, or the sticky interweaving of rain, snow, and sweat. He only has one idea. Go home. My mother is still at home. He dare not imagine what Jiuhua village is like now. He can only pray constantly. It is impossible for the whole village to be lost. There must be people who have not drunk water, and there must be people who are awake. They will definitely wake up the villagers in the village and escape together. I will definitely do it. It was not the usual tranquility that greeted him, but a great fire. A big fire that almost burned everything. Jing felt a burning sensation on his face, but his heart felt like ice had formed. Without thinking, he rushed directly into the flames. There were also many disciples from the Hanging Mountain in the dense forest who witnessed a young boy who couldn't see his true face rush into the fire in the dark night. They were all dressed in elegant blue robes, sitting upright on the ground, holding the same seal in their hands, and no one cared who rushed in. A sudden gust of evil wind. Among the 3 people sitting at the front of the suspended mountain couch, an old man opened his eyes and said, "Here we go." The old man with a broken arm beside him immediately shouted, "Stand up." Immediately, a strange talisman appeared above the disciple's head in the suspended mountain, and then the entire world fell silent. The aura around the talisman grew larger and larger, until it enveloped the entire territory of Jiuhua village. The flames dissipated in an instant. All that remained inside was a wailing and wailing sound. Another purple-haired man said, "Corpse slave. Get up. Print neatly and pinch." The howling in Jiuhua village came to a standstill for an instant. The old man finally said slowly, "Without my instructions, disciples of Hanging Mountain are not allowed to enter Jiuhua village." The figure slowly moved forward, but was stopped by an old man with a broken arm behind him. He whispered, "Master, recently during the supervision of disciples at the foot of the mountain, they discovered that there was a strange movement in the sword Immortal steel. Do not approach southwest. He. The old man waved his hand and said nonchalantly, "It's just a legend. Why be afraid? Don't let these nonsense delay time. When I master the veins on the son of the Xianyao, it will give us a big reward. The 8th grade demon pill of 2 Shanxian can also make me enter the 7th grade. At that time." The corners of their mouths slightly raised. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Corpse Slave. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Corpse Slave. Mother. 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 What's wrong with you? Mother. Baihan grabbed her mother's arm and couldn't understand what was happening now. Half of her mother's body had been burned, and her face was covered in wounds intertwined with blood and ashes. However, she not only did not feel any pain, but her eyes still shone with green light, standing motionless on the ground like a wooden figure. Mother. Baihan tried her best to shake her arms, but she still didn't react at all. Corpse slave. He dared not think, but had to think. Is this what Wang Xuanfu called a corpse slave? Why did it become like this? Baihan immediately took out the rope and tied his mother's body to the thick tree trunk in the courtyard. However, at this moment, his mother bit down and blood sprayed out from Baihan's arm. He suddenly withdrew his arm, and a piece of meat had already been eaten. Eating it, he understood that his mother had lost her sanity and consciousness, otherwise even if she died, it would not have been possible to bite him. Baihan avoided her mother's biting and restrained her tightly before giving herself a simple bandage. I feel a bit dizzy. Baihan forcefully calmed down and jumped onto the roof in a few seconds. At this moment, he fixed his gaze and saw a high-rising halo in the southeast village. What is that? Baihan was puzzled and looked around, only to find a blood-red glow next to the ancient tree in the center of the village. Ah! With a loud shout coming from under his feet, Baihan instinctively dodged and opened his teeth and claws, wielding his bloodthirsty jaws. Suddenly, a monster with a cow head and a horse body appeared. Baihan suddenly slipped and fell to the ground, but the monster had no intention of letting him go. It jumped off the beam and chased after him. Fawn wide open, this mouthful of steel teeth goes down. Even if Baihan has steel tendons and bones, they will turn into powder. He immediately drew out the dagger for scraping herbs and bent forward, like a hunting wolf. How could it be impossible to pick herbs at the foot of the suspended mountain without knowing anything? He wants to become a sword immortal, even if he doesn't know Taoism. He has learned a lot of life-saving battles in his daily life. At the age of 12, Baihan climbed the mountain and could fight some fierce beasts at the age of 15. At the age of 18, he even injured a tree demon. He still remembers that time vividly. When he got injured and went home from the mountain, his mother only said one sentence. No matter what difficulties you encounter in the future, don't be afraid. Once you're afraid, you've already lost half. Baihan was already bold, and with countless experiences, he quickly stabilized his mind. Just as the bull demon rushed towards him, he dodged to the side and stabbed the opponent's side with a dagger. But the dagger is broken. That cow demon's body is surprisingly intact. Baihan gritted his teeth, but felt helpless. Since he couldn't fight, all he had left was to run away. He immediately grabbed the garlic rack next to him and jumped to a high place in 3 or 2 leaps. Although the ox demon was strong and powerful, it seemed to have poor intelligence and would not rely on nearby assistance. Instead, it would suddenly jump up. Baihan kicked out 3 or 4 tiles and stopped him. Since there are monsters here, he is worried that his mother will be eaten by them, and of course, he cannot go too far. Just as he was anxious, suddenly a black shadow burst in from outside and bit down at the cow demon. Blood suddenly splattered everywhere. Baihan was stunned. He knew this black shadow, and it was his neighbor, Uncle Wei. Uncle Wei's eyes were already emerald green at this moment, like a hungry beast, biting the cow demon into pieces with each bite. His teeth are steel teeth. Grandpa Wei. What move is this? Baihan asked with a trembling voice. Grandpa Wei was gnawing on the cow demon while making a whimpering sound. Even after the cow demon had completely died, he ignored Baihan and ran out of the room, seemingly looking for the next target. What's going on here? He suddenly remembered what Wang Xuanfu had said, the Hanging Mountain wants to refine the people in the village into corpse slaves. And then hunt down monster beasts to obtain the demon pill needed to open the pulse. It seems that Wang Xuanfu did not exaggerate, these are all true. Bai Yujing clenched her fist and turned her gaze to the burning position in the center of the village. The blood-red light enveloped a young man, who was pale and almost on the brink of death. His hair was even whiter than snow, and his face was even whiter than snow. His lifeless gaze gazed at everything in front of him, as if he understood his situation and knew what he was about to face. Those eyes were mixed with unwillingness and pain. At this moment, a pair of hands shone with blood-red light and rested on his arm. You. The young man was taken aback and looked at the person who suddenly appeared on the side, staring blankly at him. You. Who are you? My name is Bai Yujing, a villager of this village. Bai Yujing stared at his face and said, Are you sick? I'm not sick. The young man instinctively withdrew his hand and looked cautiously at the sudden appearance of Bai Yujing. The surroundings were in chaos, and many monsters suddenly erupted around them, all rushing towards the young man. Meanwhile, the people in the village who were enslaved into corpse slaves engaged in a desperate battle with the monsters. Bai Yujing urgently said, What exactly happened here? Why did it turn out like this? The boy buried his head between his legs in fear and sobbed, I don't know. You're human, don't talk to me, I won't talk to you, please. Please let me go. Bai Yujing was a bit confused at the moment. Seeing the young man with small antlers like deer antlers growing on his head, he had already concluded that he was a demon. But why was the demon invading Jiuhua village so timid? Isn't it really a demon invading Jiuhua village? Bai Yujing swallowed his saliva and suddenly felt waves of heat coming from behind. A strong aura directly threw him out. Bai Yujing collapsed on the wall, with severe pain in his spine. He suppressed the surging blood and turned to look at the person who had attacked him, only to find a very beautiful woman, only in her 20s and 80s, with pure white hair like a teenager. She was dressed in swaying white clothes, holding a silver sword in her hand, gazing at the child under the tree. In her bright eyes, tears fell at this moment. Your mother. The young man raised his head and shouted, reaching out to touch the red light. However, it was suddenly spread out, and he spat out a mouthful of blood, splashing it onto the red light. Then, the blood seemed to be absorbed and slowly dissipated. The woman turned around and shouted angrily, Yushu Zi. I have already arrived, why haven't you appeared yet? Ha ha ha. A voice from far to near finally fell in front of the woman, who was an old man wearing a suspended mountain road robe. He shook the dust on his hand and smiled, Tu Shanfei, you really dare to come. Let him go, Tu Shanfei said with a carefree and ethereal demeanor, holding his sword and pointing directly at the newcomer. I didn't expect that you, the Xiankong Mountain, boasted of being a Taoist sect, would resort to such despicable means. Bai Yujing quietly stopped speaking and fell to the side, afraid to move around. He was afraid that if someone else overheard their conversation, they would immediately kill and silence them. So he covered his mouth and nose, crawled to the ground, and watched secretly with only one eye. However, upon seeing this, he couldn't distinguish for a moment who was a fairy or a monster. Fortunately, upon hearing these words, he realized that the old man was the leader of the Hanging Mountain, Yushu Zi. He felt relieved and said to himself, the blessings of the Hanging Mountain protect the mountain villages all over the world. More than 10 villages around him are protected from the invasion of monsters. It seems that even if Lin Xia dares to secretly sell the demon pill, this righteous ancestor will definitely restore the people to their original state. It seems that there is no need to worry now. With this in mind, he decided to take advantage of the chaos around him and find an opportunity to escape secretly, so as not to let the two of them notice and avoid unnecessary trouble. Yushuzi swayed and brushed the dust softly, saying, whether my Hanging Mountain is immortal or not is a consensus among everyone, and whether Tu Shanfei is a demon or not is well known within a radius of 100 miles. Tu Shanfei sneered and said, if you provoke people's hearts, it's okay to kill us. Why do you need to kill us quickly? Our Tu Shan family never eats human essence and blood, nor indiscriminately kills innocent people. The people who have slaughtered the people in the surrounding 4 villages in recent years have always been your hanging mountain. The magic you are practicing is much more evil than ours. Do you want to devour the mysterious demon veins in my son's body? Fantasy. Bai Yujing was stunned and looked at the two in surprise. What is this female demon talking about? Yu Shuzi remained calm and composed, with no signs of refutation on his face. Instead, he continued, I have entered the 8th rank Immortal Dao and am no different from you. With the blessing of this demon-slaying formation, you are bound to die. The mysterious demon veins on the demon's body have no connection to you. When you fled to Tu Mountain, you should have understood that this is the end of your life. Tu Shanfei chuckled and said, you are willing to sacrifice the lives of hundreds of people in this village for your own cultivation. Even if you reach the 8th grade, what would happen? Do you really think you can handle this falling eagle sword? Yushu Zeman casually said, why don't you give it a try? With a wave of his hands, dust rose from the air, and the village roared loudly. Then, the well-connected road gathered numerous corpse slaves, roaring and roaring as they rushed out of the corner. Bai Yujing felt like her whole body had solidified, and she never expected such a scene. Mom! He saw his own mother in the crowd. How did she break free from constraints? The heart of Bai Yujing is stirred like a knife. The corpse slave rushed like a tide, flying straight towards Tu Mountain. And Tu Shan's flying technique was elegant, as if he didn't pay much attention to these corpse slaves. With 3 swords at his fingertips, he directly lifted those corpse slaves off their heads. The corpse slave who was picked up and cut off his throat immediately fell to the ground, his green eyes quietly fading, and he died directly. Bai Yujing quickly got up. Mother. Has already pounced. Mother. At the moment when the sword light flickered, Bai Yujing's brain was completely blank, and he unconsciously rushed out from under his feet, don't harm my mother. Yu Shuzi's mouth slightly raised, and he had already grasped a sword edge in his hand. Tu Shanfei stood in the air, his single sword hanging straight away, only to find Bai Yujing blocking in front of a corpse slave. She was secretly surprised and instinctively stopped, is it a person? However, her airway rebounded and the sword swung towards the side. At this critical moment, Yu Shuzi's sword edge was like a rainbow piercing through the sun, heading straight towards Tu Shanfei's chest. Tu Shanfei's mouth was bleeding, and he looked down at his chest, already pierced by a sword. She immediately returned to clap her palm, but Yu Shuzi never expected that Tu Shanfei, who had just collected his energy and swallowed his dark energy, could still clap his palm and release his sword edge to block him. Unexpectedly, this palm was powerful and heavy. Even though they were both 8th grade immortals, there was still a huge difference in strength. With just one palm, it directly shattered Yu Shuzi's arms, and even injured the inner palace. He spewed out blood and fell to the ground, choking and covering his chest. Tu Shanfei also fell. The group of demons has arrived, and they are now entangled with the corpse slaves. Bai Yujing controlled his mother's hands from behind and held her tightly, not daring to let go, but his gaze unintentionally turned towards Tu Shanfei. At this moment, Yu Shuzi called out, little brother, kill her. I will let you enter the hanging mountain and become my eldest disciple. I will pass on all the Taoist teachings to you. Bai Yujing suddenly looked at Yu Shuzi. Although he was seriously injured, he was still alive. A question surged in his heart. He shouldn't be the only one who knew about this matter, but why did he enter Jiuhua village alone? In theory, if there was a helping hand in the dark, he would have already come to help, but why didn't anyone come to help? Is it difficult? Bai Yujing seemed to understand and said, Senior, was it you? Who made the villagers in Jiuhua village look like they are now? Was it you? Who wanted to kill this demon and refine the demon pill? You. Yu Shuzi looked at Bai Yujing in shock, how do you know? Bai Yujing looked at him coldly, his anger rising from the bottom of his heart. It was you who turned my mother into this. Yu Shuzi saw that he couldn't be deceived, so he angrily said, so what if it's me? Kid, there's a way to heaven, you don't leave, and there's no way to hell, you insist on coming. Okay. I've never done anything to leave a legacy in my life. Since you dare to ask, I must be prepared to return home. After speaking, he just turned his wrist and threw it away like a flying dust. He immediately tied it around Bai Yujing's neck, pulled it to his side in an instant, and clasped it into Bai Yujing's chest. I'll borrow your life. A force that appeared in vain began to stir from the depths of Bai Yujing's body, almost sucking him dry in an instant. The powerful force made Bai Yujing unable to move, but at that moment, a figure rushed forward and opened its bloody mouth, biting at Yu Shuzi's shoulder. Mother! Bai Yujing's face was instantly filled with tears. Bastard! Yu Shuzi turned with one hand and grabbed the corpse slave's head with the other. How dare you disobey the immortal Lord's law? Little insect dares to break the corpse slave's seal, and I will make you suffer forever. Bai Yujing saw her mother. Her eyes no longer had the green glow, but the usual gentle and loving gaze. At this moment, everything seemed to calm down. Her body was completely shattered, from the center of her eyebrows to her arms, from her chest to her clothes. Fluttering in the flying snow, white and red intertwined under the night sky. Bai Yujing froze for a moment, her blood seemed to have solidified all over her body. His eyes, unconsciously, had 2 extra green pupils. Kill. Kill. Kill you. Bai Yujing's head curved downward in a strange curve, biting into Yu Shuzi's arm. The moment when Yu Shu felt pain and let go. Bai Yujing pounced on him. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Sword Immortal, Baihan Mountain. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Sword Immortal, Baihan Mountain. A cold and fishy night. The young man looked at Bai Yujing and felt his stomach twitching. This was the first time he had seen someone, and he used his red and white teeth to bite the other person to death. Bai Yujing's teeth were soaked in blood, and his hands angrily dug to death in Yu Shuzi's eye sockets. His flames of anger were still burning, almost losing his sanity. He had made the culprit in front of him, who should have been dismembered, his dinner for tonight. Stop. Stop. Cough cough cough. Chu Shanfei's fierce voice echoed in his ear, you can't kill him. Bai Yujing's eyes were still green and his pupils were dull and lax. He bent like a walking corpse, tilted his head, and looked strangely at Tu Shanfei, who was sitting on the ground limply. He walked out of the pool of blood. Time seemed to have stopped, and the snowflakes scattered in the sky seemed to freeze in mid-air at this moment. Tu Shanfei sighed and smiled bitterly, Jiya, do you still feel pain on your body? The young Jiya still had a pale complexion, covering his chest and lowering his head, saying, I just hope to die soon. Tu Shanfei turned his head and looked at Jiya, with endless pity in his eyes and eyebrows. He wanted to reach out and touch his son, but helplessly, the eerie red light had blocked everything. He could only whisper, my mother won't live long. The corpse poison in Yu Shuzi's hand is indeed incredibly powerful. Even if he could train it into such a corpse poison, I don't know how many people he has killed. Jiya's appointment leaned against the locust tree, and his heart was filled with emotion. Tears welled up in his eyes, saying, Mother, these years of hard work have given me 7 more years to live. Upon hearing these words, a hint of tenderness flashed in Tu Shanfei's eyes, and she resolutely looked towards Bai Yujing. At this moment, she seemed to have made a great decision. Immediately, he flew out and slapped Bai Yujing on the forehead. Absolutely. A powerful heat wave was coming towards Bai Yujing, and his eyes widened. The green light dissipated in an instant. He suddenly opened his eyes and looked at Tu Shanfei in front of him, you. Tu Shanfei covered his mouth and said urgently, Yu Shuzi is not dead yet. The demon-slaying formation on the hanging mountain will cooperate with the soul ring. Even if the demon slayer's body is damaged, his soul will enter the soul ring and remain immortal. I ask you, do you want to avenge your mother? Revenge. He's not dead yet. Bai Yujing's anger was still burning, holding a short dagger in his hand. He had never experienced any great storms or waves, let alone thought that one day such a terrifying event would come to his life like a bolt from the blue, and his experiences just now appeared before him one by one. A grinning monster. A morally upright immortal. A corpse slave who destroys human nature. All of this seems like a dream. But the pungent smell of blood constantly reminded him that all of this was true. Bai Yujing's whole body began to tremble. His world collapsed at this moment, and those once beautiful and comfortable became foam and dust overnight. What kind of world is this? What exactly is the immortal path that he once eagerly anticipated? Why did a demon show mercy to him throughout the night? What's wrong with this world? No one can give him an answer. Think. Of course I want to. At the moment when Bai Yujing looked at Tu Shanfei, it seemed that everything had planted a cause at this moment. Who knows when the outcome will be? What are you doing? Suddenly, a furious roar came from behind, and Bai Yujing couldn't forget this voice no matter what. Yu Shu Zi. Since death is inevitable, I always have to do something. I prefer to make you suffer more than just sit and wait for death. Tu Shanfei smiled and placed his palm on Bai Yujing's forehead. He shouted with great courage, let me give it a try today. What is the power of your carefully prepared demon-slaying array? A warm current suddenly rose all over her body, and then directly rushed towards the Ji cliff behind her. In an instant, the red light that had originally suspended in front of Ji cliff dissipated. But when Bai Yujing looked at her again, she was like a withered flower, with no trace of blood. 8th grade demon pill for you, kid. Don't let me Tu Shan cut off my pulse. Tu Shanfei almost exhausted all her strength before squeezing out such a sentence from her mouth. After kneeling on the ground, her body involuntarily collapsed on Bai Yujing's chest. Immediately after, Tu Shanfei's body began to dissipate, and his whole body's breath formed a clear blue pill with visible patterns to the naked eye. Is this the 8th grade demon pill? Without hesitation, Bai Yujing grabbed the demon pill and turned around to see a bell floating on the body of Yu Shuzi. The bell made a piercing and sharp sound, ah. Put it down. Miscellaneous. If you take this pill away, no matter where you run to the ends of the world, I will kill you. I will skin and bone you, shatter your body into countless pieces. Can you spare me if I let go? I don't need you to spare me, I'm going to kill you. Bai Yujing held the dagger again, but the voice of Kujiya slowly rang out. Now if you put an effort to hit a broken bell, why don't you think about how to escape before his power recovers and he finds his body? The demon formation outside needs someone to protect it. Even people from the hanging mountain cannot easily leave the formation eye. Do you really think you can escape? The corpse slave seal is already in your body, no matter the ends of the earth, you are all my corpse slaves. I can't run away. Kid, come over now and give me the demon pill. I won't kill you. Bai Yujing was too lazy to listen to his threats. Since there was no way to harm him now, there was no need to stay any longer. He immediately picked up Jiya, who had collapsed on the ground, and headed straight towards his own courtyard. You're so brave, cough cough. Surprisingly not moved. Jiya lay peacefully in Bai Yujing's arms, coughing violently and laughing bitterly. I am indeed bold, but I am not moved because I know he is deceiving me. Bai Yujing ran quickly until the courtyard of his own house stopped, cautiously looking left and right, and only after confirming that there was no one, did he open the secret door of the cellar and jump down. After groping and igniting the candlelight, Bai Yujing finally placed Jiya on a pile of vegetables on one side, frowning and asking, what's going on here? Jiya covered his chest and said, you brought me here to ask me what's going on. Bai Yujing said, otherwise. Jiya closed his eyes and shook his head helplessly. I think you should find a way to go out. My life is not long, and I won't be able to see the sun tomorrow. But you are different. Not only do you have life to live, but you can also live very well. Since Bai Yujing came here, he naturally had some considerations in mind. This is his family's cellar, and he knew there was a secret door behind this vegetable rack, but his mother never allowed him to enter it. I won't die. As Bai Yujing spoke, tears inexplicably flowed down his face. Thinking of his mother's death, he couldn't calm down at all. He clenched his fist and said, not only will I not die, but I will definitely kill him. Do you want to kill him? Jiya lowered his head and said with a bitter smile, do you know that he wants to kill you now, but it's as easy as a palm. Bai Yujing said, of course I know. No, you don't know at all, Jiya said. You now have the same corpse slave seal as me. If it weren't for my mother suppressing your qi, you would have become a walking corpse now. Bai Yujing's expression froze, almost never expecting things to be like this. He stared blankly at Jiya, unable to speak for a moment. My bloodline can unravel the corpse slave seal. Jiya lowered his head and revealed a pale yet warm smile. I can help you. Since you can decipher the corpse slave seal, why do you not decipher yourself and come to help me? Bai Yujing asked. Because of me. Jiya coughed again, his pure white lips and teeth flushed with blood. There is a wide range of implications here, and I can no longer fully explain it to you. I can only tell you a few of the most important things. Firstly, I am the sole guide of the corpse slave seal. In simple terms, he wants to manipulate you through me, and if I die, it will be over. Secondly, I carry the inherited demon spirit of the Tu Shan Xianyao lineage, but this demon spirit is incomplete and needs another half to supplement it completely. The remaining half. That's why I'm here, I'm afraid. You need to find the tomb of Sword Immortal 100 years ago. Tomb of Sword Immortal. Isn't that right under Jiuhua village? Bai Yujing still remembers the location of the Sword Immortal tomb, which is the ancestral hall in the village. Jiya continued, thirdly, if you continue to live, you must not come into contact with two types of people. One is the embroidery commissioner of the Shaoyang dynasty, and the other is the White Lotus. They both want to obtain this part of the inheritance power. Perhaps this is why the Hanging Mountain will pursue me. White Lotus. Embroiderer. Bai Yujing took a breath and said, are you saying, first, I must kill you, second, I not only kill you, but also take away your breath. Third, after I take away your breath, I still want to hide. You understand now. Jiya smiled again and leaned freely against the wall behind him, whispering, you must kill me, otherwise you and the people in the village cannot survive. You must also take away my breath, otherwise you cannot seek revenge. You must also hide, because the people in these two forces are the strongest people in the world. He extended his pure white and tender hands and gently grasped Bai Yujing's palm. Revenge me, okay. Bai Yujing's eyes were bright red, and he didn't know how to face the young man in front of him. My mother has also died. In front of me. At this moment, all the strength of Jiya seemed to collapse, tears like a spring, blood flowing from the corners of his mouth and nostrils, indicating that he had reached his limit. Kill them. Please. Kill everyone who harmed our mother. Okay. Bai Yujing was already infected by his angry and hopeful eyes, blurting out a good word, but then he was completely stunned. The boy in front of him is no longer in human form, but has transformed into a snow-white fox. A silver-white bloodline pill condensed from him. Bai Yujing suddenly felt like he had entered a dream, surrounded by a complete chaos. Suddenly, a tearing pain came from all over his body, and his bones seemed to have been broken. At the moment when this endless pain came, he fell into a coma. Jiya looked at the blood vessel on his chest that symbolized his life of over a decade, condensed into a Dao Yuan that slowly emerged from his body and floated onto Bai Yujing's body. Finally, his suspended heart was let go. The mortal body cannot bear the power of blood vessels. The first condition for inheriting the power of blood vessels is to quench the body and refine blood. You will suffer. Jiuhua smiled gently and said, unfortunately, this Xianyao vein is only half incomplete. I hope you are lucky enough to find the remaining one. His face changed. The silver-white light of the Xianyao pulse was suddenly enveloped by a crimson aura, and this aura slowly emanated from the wall behind him. Jiuhua exclaimed in shock, here. You. Who are you? An old voice slowly flowed out from the wall. Baihan Mountain. Jiuhua trembled all over and immediately retreated to the wall. He was shocked and said, You are the sword immortal who snatched the dark demon vein from my two mountain 100 years ago. Now, I'll give it back to you. The crimson light suddenly shone brightly, illuminating the entire cellar and devouring everything. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Don't be me, go beyond me. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Don't be me, go beyond me. When Baiyujing woke up, he heard the sound of turbulent footsteps around him. Having lived in the mountains and forests for a long time, he immediately became alert and instinctively reached out in the darkness to grab the dagger tied to his wrist. Only then did he feel much more at ease in his heart. Someone. The sound doesn't feel like it's by my side, it's in the next room. Not here, said an adult man in a respectful voice. Looking for it again. After another slightly thick voice fell, the sound of footsteps surged out and dissipated in a moment. Baiyujing held her breath and remained calm, daring not to speak. She waited for a long time calmly until it was confirmed that there was no more sound before slowly twisting her body to sit up. However, with just one movement, she immediately felt pain all over her body and was sweating profusely. The surroundings were pitch black, so quiet that only breathing could be heard. Breathing alone. Baiyujing still wanted to move. Although his palm no longer felt pain, his arm had almost exhausted all its strength due to the recent movement and could no longer move. I've only been unconscious for a day, it's not bad. An old voice slowly sounded, with a hint of contentment in its laughter. Baiyujing was horrified in his heart, and a shiver came from all over his body. He thought to himself, what's the situation? What kind of person did you meet again? Can't it be those people from Hanging Mountain? Suddenly, the surroundings lit up a bit, and Baiyujing instinctively closed her eyes. As the warm light rose, she slightly opened her eyes. In front of her was a narrow cave, with an old man with white hair sitting against the wall, staring at her. The dim light crawled on his face, and the candlelight flickered with each other, avoiding him as if very timid. There is no wind here, but flames are shaking. This candle was lit for Baiyujing, because the old man no longer needed light. His eyes had two deep incisions that had already cut him off from the light of this world. Half of his body is a skeleton, while the other half is a human. Baiyujing seems to have begun to accept this inexplicable world. Since he returned to Jiuhua village, this originally peaceful world has already become different. He has seen the fox demon transformed into a human being, and the cultivator who can be resurrected even after death. So now, seeing half of the people, there is naturally no fear. He knew it was just self-comforting, comforting his already trembling arms and legs. You. Baiyujing choked up and didn't know what to say. I've been thinking about how to avoid scaring you, but now it seems like I'm worried too much. The old man half smiled, while the other half only moved his chin slightly. Baiyujing swallowed his saliva and was surprised by the other person's behavior. The dagger in his hand loosened a bit and he whispered, "Senior. Why are you looking like this? This is the price of longevity." The old man smiled and turned to Baiyujing, touching his pure white skeleton with his hand. Chongsheng. Do you know the method of Chongsheng? Baiyujing was shocked. He was surprised to see such a legendary figure, but This Changsheng looks a bit ugly, right? The old man sighed earnestly and said slowly, yes, not really. This eternal life was originally the supreme path that cultivators sought. As a cultivator, I should also seek this method of eternal life, but it is still a failure. If it were not for my own urgent attack and eagerness, how could I forcibly take things from others for my own use? Jiang was said to be confused, but still did not disturb the old man's self-narration. He understood that the blind person who could live in such an environment until now must be very lonely. Lonely people always want to say something. I have been practicing hard for many years and have also made some achievements in the martial arts world, but I have never been able to resist temptation. Legend has it that there is a Xianyao body vein on the immortal mountain of Tushan, which allows heaven and earth to have the same lifespan and all things to have the same destiny. So I searched for 3 years and chased after Tushan. After killing wildly, I seized the Xianyao body and learned the secret technique of immortality after absorbing it. He picked up a wine jug, shook it a few times, took a sip, and said again, the battle back then left my body with incurable injuries. In addition, devouring the Xianyao body with all my energy, the recovery of my breath was very slow, and my body slowly collapsed. No matter how I practiced, I couldn't recover. It wasn't until 30 years ago that I realized that the Xianyao body is just a bone that never ages or dies, always strong, but flesh and blood. It is ultimately a flesh and blood body. He paused and smiled. To this day, it has become what you see. Jiang was frightened and said, Senior. But have you seen the scene of the inheritance of the Xianyao bloodline before? Ha ha ha. The old man laughed heartily. Sure enough, you're really smart. I never expected that when I said this, you could already guess 7 or 8. Jiang's face suddenly turned ugly. I didn't expect that I had just left the wolf's den and entered the tiger's den, but unfortunately. He struggled to move his body, but still couldn't move. The feeling of fragmentation spread throughout his body. Unfortunately, I couldn't move, otherwise you wouldn't kill me casually. Of course you can't move. The old man turned around and leaned his hands on his knees, saying, Jiuhua is a Tu Shan Yaozi. His body is a Xianyao lineage that has been passed down by Tu Shan for thousands of years. Even though he has reached the 6th level of immortality at the age of 17, he still cannot carry the power of this lineage. There are countless treasures hidden within this lineage. If you don't have the Xianyao body, no matter what, you cannot support this body of flesh and blood. He suddenly smiled, pale and powerless. I can give you this Xianyao body. Jiang was truly stunned this time and thought to himself, he could have killed me directly, but why is that so? Is it possible that this old man didn't lie to me? But I don't know him, why doesn't he take my advantage and instead give his body to me? Excuse me, Senior, he asked with confusion as he couldn't figure it out. The old man said, do you want revenge? For your mother, for Tu Shan. Of course. Jiang blurted out, even though his body was unable to move and his whole body was in pain, the flames of revenge never extinguished. Okay, then how do you want revenge? Of course. Escape first, and then find a way to cultivate and enhance one's own strength. Jiang did not carefully consider this matter, relying solely on momentary thoughts to say. Not bad. The old man seemed very satisfied. What level of cultivation do you want to reach? Jiang was speechless, but immediately recalled that he had once received an 8th-grade demon pill, and then recalled the conversation between Tu Shanfei and Yushuzi at that time. Only then did he say, at least until the 7th grade, maybe we can have the power to fight against Yushuzi. Yushuzi is now at the 8th level of the Immortal Dao's strength. If he doesn't have the 7th level of strength, he shouldn't fight recklessly. You are very smart. Even if you are angry and attack your heart, you are not in a hurry to achieve anything and do something in vain. The old man leaned against the wall, his smile filled with joy, and he stroked his beard with great satisfaction, saying, in this world, there is more than just one path, the path of immortality, why do you have to cultivate the path of immortality? Because I want to become a sword immortal. Jing endured the excruciating pain and raised his head. Regardless, he believed that when saying these words, his head should not be lowered. This was his lifelong wish and the only thing he had to do now. It's his dream, and it's also the strength of his hard work. Sword immortal. The old man smiled and said, "What's good about being a sword immortal? Why do you have to become a sword immortal?" Because of strength, because of strength. A red mist rose in Jing's eyes, because the people around Sword Immortal will not be turned into corpse slaves, and Sword Immortal's mother will not die like ants. Not bad. The old man shook the gourd, but in that moment, his expression faded. He took a deep breath, as if he had made up his mind. He immediately dried the wine in the gourd in one gulp and threw it beside Jing. The Xianyao body pulse can be used to cultivate its technique, and I will find a good technique for you. His pace of speech became inexplicably fast, without giving Jing a chance to interrupt. Immortal and martial arts have come together through different paths, and we have cultivated 15 sections. After reaching the first level, we have reached the 10th level of the immortal way, and after reaching the first level, we have ascended to the heavenly realm. After reaching the first level, we have entered the heavenly realm. The journey of martial arts is even more difficult. After entering the heavenly realm, one can only enter the remaining 4 realms with martial arts. All practices in the world are connected in the end. Those distant things will naturally become known when you grow up. The old man smiled and said, "Kid, I'll give you a sword and a wine jug, and then I'll send you out. You have to fulfill your promise to me, understand?" Jing was stunned for a moment and thought to herself, "Promise? When did I promise you?" Although she was puzzled, she didn't dare to ask randomly. At this critical moment, it was obvious that the old man could do whatever he wanted. "Do you have anything else you want to ask me?" The old man crouched down and grabbed Jing's shoulder. Jing paused for a moment and quickly said, "So. Lord Sword Immortal, what realm is it?" "Ha ha ha." The old man's body lit up with a golden aura. "If the Shaoyang dynasty does not fall in a day, all the people in the world will only have heavenly treasures, and they will never be able to enter the realm of freedom." In a thunderous moment, a huge golden light burst out with an endless force, instantly destroying the cellar. The vast world suddenly shone with golden light, illuminating the entire night sky with a majestic aura. The powerful breath infused into Jing's body, and at this moment, he could no longer bear it and fainted. "Kid, no matter who or what the situation is, don't disclose the matter of the Xianyao bloodline, otherwise you will die." The old man stood in the air, lightly tapping his feet, and a crystal-clear sword appeared at his feet. He waved with one hand, and a thunderous roar suddenly flashed through the pitch-black night sky, with the lightning streaks shooting straight at the transparent blade beneath his feet. In an instant, 2 words appeared on the flawless sword body. "Shocking Hong." The old man faced southwest and shouted, "Pifu, you have been in charge of this world for 100 years, which has made countless cultivators in the martial arts world unable to lift their heads. Today, I will give it a try. With this 100-year sword, can you tear open your vast realm?" The sky changes color, clouds and rain disperse, day and night are inseparable. The long sword accompanied the old man, soaring straight into the sky. And Jing's body was pushed out by a powerful heat wave and fell into a forest. In just a moment, the old man in the sky was covered in blood, his skeleton collapsed, and he fell down. The sky was originally pitch black, but surprisingly, a gap appeared, revealing golden patterns. Jing looked at the sky foolishly and murmured, "Are you difficult? Are you?" An old, tired, and struggling voice rang out from somewhere, lingering in his ears. "Don't miss me, don't become me, go beyond me. Child, poor and resilient, never falling into the ambition of the blue clouds." End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Sky Slaying and Thundering Sword. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Chapter 6. Sky-slaying and thundering sword. Fenyang City. Jingzhou, Governor General's office. Pei Santian is lying in bed. The entire city of Fenyang knows the three major hobbies of this city lord, the governor of Zhizhou, namely beauty, good wine, and good meat. As long as you take one of these three and go find him to handle things, there are very few things that cannot be accomplished. If he really encounters something impossible, he won't touch the girl he likes, drink the best wine, or eat the most tender meat. So even though the people of Fenyang City know that this prefect is a corrupt official, no one says he is not good because he is a true official. If there are any grievances or hardships in your family, even if you are a commoner, as long as you have 3 pounds of good roasted beef, 30 years of osmanthus fragrance, or a beautiful girl, you can personally deliver it to the government office and hand it over to the officials in charge. The things will be delivered in the morning, and this matter will be completed in the afternoon. Pei Sanyi never does anything overnight. Nowadays, this government office not only has a lot of good wine and meat, but also many girls. Pei Sanyi only has these 3 hobbies, and besides that, he doesn't engage in any pornography, gambling, or drugs. Today, Mr. Pei was lying in bed for a long time, waiting for someone to wake him up. According to the rules of the prefectural government office, every morning a 28 young girl would appear in his room, wearing fragrant shoes woven from osmanthus leaves, cooking 3 types of meat with top-quality sauce, and holding 3 liang of good wine. However, today, the chicken outside has gone crazy and no one has come. Pei Sanyi was not angry because he knew that he had served the girls well, and they were naturally sensible. No one had come yet, and there were only 2 situations. Firstly, women could not enter, and secondly, all the women in the mansion had died. Immediately, Pei Sanyi eliminated the second option. If all the women in the mansion died, then he must also die. Since he did not die, it means that only the first option is left. Pei Sanyi opened his eyes and sat up. The woman came in and didn't die, but she could only stand at the door and couldn't walk to her side because 4 unwelcome guests appeared in the spacious hall, 1 sitting and 3 standing. They were all wearing very nice clothes, with 3 elegant patterns embroidered on noble silk and a lotus behind them. What was different was that the person sitting had purple clothes, while the others had dark green clothes. Pei Sanyi took a deep breath and stared at the man sitting in the hall, whispering, "Is it possible that you came here from Kyoto to rob me of breakfast?" The man was grabbing the meat from the plate on the table, took a sip from his glass with his left hand, and then put the meat into his mouth. After chewing for a while, he took out a handkerchief embroidered with lotus flowers from his sleeve and wiped his mouth. "The taste is really good, it's still something that Third Lord would enjoy," he said. Pei Sanyi stood up, grabbed a long robe and draped it over his body. He walked to the hall and sat opposite the man, looking at him. "You're not here for breakfast," he said, "but I'm full." The man smiled and leaned back in the chair. He looked at someone who was over 40 last year, but was full of energy. His eyes were always sharp, as if nothing in this world could escape his eyes. "Your Majesty is directly subordinate to the embroidery commissioner, overseeing various officials, and conducting a great investigation of the world. His responsibilities are above all else, and his power is supreme. He also wields the imperial power sword, which was executed first and reported later by the Grand Tutor. If you come to me, it's either a big event in Fenyang City or me." Pei Santian sighed, his face turning ugly. This time, it was not a man who answered him, but a young girl with a heavy sword on her back. The girl took a step forward and bowed, saying, "I would like to report to the governor of Jingzhou, Mr. Pei Santian, that the purple-clothed envoy, Feng Yebe, and 3 green-clothed envoys have come to Jingzhou to investigate." Pei Santian nodded and took a sip of wine. "What are we investigating?" Sitting at the table, Feng Yi glanced at Pei Santian from a distance and grabbed a piece of meat to stuff into his mouth. He yawned and said, "Third Lord, the sky has collapsed." Pei Santian wiped his eye droppings, pulled out a large piece, and threw it into the plate of meat that Feng Yebe had eaten before stirring it with chopsticks a few times. Then, he put the other 2 plates of meat in front of him and said, what do you want me to do when the sky falls? I don't know how to make up for it. Feng Yi was stunned for a moment before his hand, which was about to grab meat, stopped in mid-air and turned to grab a wine jug. However, it was protected by Pei Santian, who helplessly supported his knees with both hands. He said again, Third Lord, the sky has collapsed. Pei Santian ate a piece of meat and frowned as he looked at Feng Yebe, seeming to not understand his meaning. He said impatiently, Brother Feng, I have no right to interfere with the embroidery commissioner's work. What's the big deal? Can't you embroidery commissioner solve it? Do you still need me to take action? Feng Yebe sighed and waved his left hand forward, take third master to take a look. The 2 young envoys in green behind immediately walked left and right to Pei Santian's side and said, Third Lord, please. Pei Santian appeared slightly angry and stood up helplessly, followed by walking out. The green coat points towards the sky. Pei Santian impatiently lifted his head, then his entire face stretched out, his eyes slightly furrowed, and his expression solidified. There was a golden crack on the deep blue sky. Feng Yebe held his sword and walked out with a plate of beef, saying as he walked, Do you believe it now? The sky is falling. Pei Santian didn't say a word for a while. Just accepting this matter had already passed a long time. After an unknown amount of time, he seemed to have figured out many things and said 3 words with great care, Jiuhua village. Feng Yebe walked calmly to Pei Santian, arched his hand and said, Thank you, Third Master. He then walked towards the outside of the courtyard. Pei Santian squatted on the ground, looking at the sky. He didn't go to deliver the embroidered clothes envoy, let alone go back to have breakfast. He just stared at him foolishly. At this time, Feng Yebe and others have already set off on the road. Boss, how does Pei Santian know what we're asking? This is the advantage of dealing with smart people. He always gives me a good result. Feng Yebe smiled and rode his horse to see from afar. He was almost near Jiuhua village, slowed down his speed, and said to the 2 young men beside him, Shaoyang, Xiaofeng, you guys should learn a bit. This Pei Sanyi is a big shot. The 2 brothers looked at each other and shook their heads helplessly. The girl next to them joked, Yes, that way we can have a family of women. Shaoyang said, Sister Jianghu, we wouldn't do things like Pei Santian. Ha ha ha. Feng Yebe smiled and said, You 3, if you can have half of the abilities of the Third Lord in the future, I will be satisfied. I won't say anything else. The 173 girls in the Third Lord's mansion have been in his mansion for 10 years at the longest. They are not only perfect, but also very nourishing. Just this, you are enough to learn. Ah. The 3 of them were all stunned, and Xiaofeng asked, Is it possible that Mr. Pei has any problems? He has nothing wrong with him. It's just that when he was just a local official in his early years, his daughter ran away and he took care of the girls in other families in this way. Think about it, if there was one thing that could force his father to sell his daughter to solve, then this family would no longer have the ability to take care of their daughter, right? But Jianghu frowned. I've heard folk rumors that Pei Sanyi not only has a promiscuous nature, but also likes to kill these women. Yeah, if everyone heard that he took good care of the girls, wouldn't all the girls from Fenyang City have been sent in? Silly. Just as a few people were talking, Feng Yi suddenly stopped his horse in the north. What's wrong, boss? Someone. The north side of Fenye was calm, but his gaze turned to the nearby dense forest. Someone. Shaoyang was puzzled and said, There are villagers in Jiuhua village. We have already entered the territory of Jiuhua village. It's normal to have people here, isn't it? The only survivor of the entire Jiuhua village is right ahead. Feng Yebe reached out his hand to signal a few people to dismount, while he lightly leaped forward on his horse's back. His body suddenly flew out and landed next to a big tree. Looking down, he saw a young man. "Oh, you look so handsome." Jianghu quickly followed and said with a smile on his face, "There are still such beautiful people in Jiuhua village. They are much stronger than those two guys, Shaoyang and Xiaofeng." Feng Yebei's face became solemn as he gently grabbed the sword beside the young man's body. "Boss, what kind of sword is this? How come I've never seen it before?" Shaoyang looked at the sword with some surprise. "The scabbard of this sword is all green but also light blue. It should be a sword with extremely strong spiritual energy. I have known the world's famous swords since I was young. I shouldn't have been unaware of such swords." "Of course you know, not only do you know, but you also really want to see it." Feng Yebei suddenly pulled the sword out of its scabbard. Suddenly, a cold aura rose from around. Shaoyang widened his eyes and said, "This sword is so strong. Is this?" Feng Yebei said, "There is only one famous sword in this world that you haven't seen before, haven't you?" Shaoyang was stunned, his face turning from shock to ecstasy. In the end, he even wanted to reach out and touch it, the stunning swan taken away by Baihan Mountain. The only Tianpin sword in Mingjian Mountain Villa. Feng Yebei's face sank. "Is it difficult?" This sword Immortal, who has disappeared for 100 years, suddenly emerged with a sword that cuts through the sky, with the purpose of him. He stood up and said, "Take him back to the inn." End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Interrogation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Interrogation. There were two things that made everyone uneasy in Fenyang City, the first of which was a gap in the sky. Of course, this matter can only make Mr. Pei uncomfortable alone, because the others do not know what the relationship between this matter and Fenyang City is too great. But the second thing is the main reason for people's anxiety. The purple robe envoy of the embroidery commissioner arrived in the city of Fenyang. The sky doesn't crack, it doesn't matter much. If the sky collapses, we can all die together. But when the purple clothes arrived, the sky in everyone's heart was in danger. In the Shaoyang royal court, there is no official who dares not provoke more than the embroidery commissioner. This organization, which is both awe-inspiring and frightening, has always been the most mysterious and legendary place in the entire martial arts world and court. There is a nursery rhyme circulating in the rumors. Being an official is not afraid of sin, but afraid of being skilled in embroidery. Red clothes fight, green clothes curse, and when it comes to green clothes, the soul is caught. Seeing blue clothes turn around and run, I can still leave a bone behind. Whenever there is a purple robe, even the Prime Minister must be frightened by peeling off his skin. Except for the magistrate Pei Santian, all other officials in Fenyang City felt as if their souls had been taken off when they heard that the purple-clothed envoy had arrived in the city. Even on duty, they were still restless and did not talk to anyone. Everyone was reflecting on the same three issues. Who is being arrested this time? Is there anything I need to do? Will my matter be discovered? The next step is for each official to use their network of connections to investigate the purpose of this deployment of the purple clothes envoy, but unfortunately, after a whole day, nothing was found. After all, the purple-clothed envoy is always secretive when it comes to handling affairs. The small things that cannot be inquired about, the big things that can be inquired about. However, no one could have imagined that Feng Yebei, one of the 5 purple envoys who could make the officials of Fenyang City tremble at the sound of the wind and lose their souls with just one name, was sitting in the private room of the Flower Moon Tower, drinking high-quality osmanthus wine, savoring the Longjing of the new year, eating expensive Lonling pastries, and staring at a young man who had just awakened. In Bai Yujing's eyes, there was only confusion. He didn't understand why he could meet new people every time he woke up. Hey! Where is my sword? Oh! Here it is. After grabbing her sword tightly, Bai Yujing looked at Feng Yebei sitting in the middle and thought that she must have been unconscious in the cellar. Now that she has woken up here, the person in front of her should not be a bad person. Otherwise, how could the sword still be here? How could my head still be here? You. Baiyujing probed, who are you? The first speaker was Jianghu, who smiled and said, my name is Su Jianghu, the river, the Huai of Huainan. Then she pointed to the two brothers and said, they are twin brothers. My older brother's name is Tong Shaoyang, and my younger brother's name is Tong Xiaofeng. This is our leader. The Prince of Shaoyang personally ordered the embroidery commissioner and guard, the imperial commissioner, the purple clothes martial commissioner, the minister of rights, the wind knight north, and the wind lord. Baiyujing felt dizzy and disoriented, but quickly nodded, oh. My name is Baiyujing. It's the white Yujing in the sky. Su Jianghu chuckled, but then his expression froze instantly. He looked incredulously at the north wind and night, boss, the white jade capital in the sky. The 12th floor. Feng Yebe reached out his hand to signal her to stop, while he took a sip of his tea and said, let me ask you, what happened in Jiuhua village? Baiyujing had just woken up, and his feelings for that night had become much more indifferent. Now that he was brought up again, his chest was filled with grief and anger, and he immediately said, it's Hanging Mountain. The people of Hanging Mountain have turned them into corpse slaves. The Taoist mountain gate on the suspended mountain, which is more than 30 miles away from here, Tong Xiaofeng asked. Yes, Baiyujing nodded and said. Why did they do this? Feng Yebe asked again. Baiyujing suddenly paused and thought to himself, who are they? Do I have to say it? How much do they know about the demon and sword fairy? The things I know, the inheritance of the Tushan demon clan. The senior sword fairy once said, whoever knows about this will take my life. I can't remember anything. Baiyujing leaned his forehead and remembered the storylines that the old gentleman who used to preach in Fenyang City loved to say. I just remember that my mother became a corpse slave and wanted to eat me, so I ran away. Then I met a very old person who appeared, handed me this sword, and threw me out. He raised his head and looked at Feng Yebe, big. Lord, is my mother okay? Baiyujing's chest was hurting, but he understood that he was already dead. No matter how much he respected her, his mother could not come back. Now he was the only hope for revenge, and he couldn't put himself in any danger. Feng Yebe's sharp eyes lightly swept over Baiyujing, leaning against a chair and saying without changing his color, there are 372 people in Jiuhua village, all of whom have turned into dry corpses. Jiya lied to me. Isn't he saying that he is the seal of corpse slaves and can unlock the seal of corpse slaves on these people? Baiyujing covered her chest, took a few trembling breaths, and leaned weakly against the bed, feeling unbearable pain in her heart. The relatives who accompanied her as she grew up were no longer there. At this moment, he became an orphan. Why do you say it's Hanging Mountain? Feng Yebe asked slowly. Because I saw someone. Baiyujing's eyes suddenly lit up and he said immediately, he said his name is Yushu Zi, and he even fought with a woman with white hair. After he was killed, he even entered a soul-inducing bell, but to his surprise, he could still speak after entering. Baiyujing, who was lying and deceiving for the first time, even though she was very careful, still revealed many flaws. How could these words, which were not in line with the preface, be kept hidden from the ear of the embroiderer? However, Feng Yebe did not choose to expose him, but continued to ask according to his words. What kind of bell is that? Purple-black, with a string hanging down, below is a pair of bells that can hover in the air and won't fall even if no one grabs them. Yushu Zi can hide inside and still speak. Baiyujing immediately began to vividly depict it. Feng Yebe leaned back on his chair and confirmed that Baiyujing's description of the soul ring was true, in order to confirm his previous words. The words he didn't believe earlier gradually became credible, but bigger problems arose. Why? Even if the embroiderer is unaware of this matter at the first time, and a village becomes a corpse slave, it will be reported to the governor. At that time, the governor only needs to submit a document to the Tiange pavilion where the embroiderer is located, and the embroiderer will investigate it thoroughly. Is it possible that the leader of this suspended mountain is a donkey? How could a donkey become a leader? It doesn't make sense. Feng Yebei never likes to speculate. What he says is either a problem or a conclusion, and when he has no conclusion, all he needs to do is investigate. He never draws conclusions easily, nor does he say anything easily. After becoming the purple-clothed envoy, any words spoken by Feng Yebei have enough weight. But now the investigation has become a problem. Is it necessary for a purple-clothed envoy to investigate the matter of a village and a dilapidated mountain gate? Saying it out doesn't make people laugh their teeth out. Thinking of this, Feng Yebei suddenly discovered a strange thing. Yesterday, when he went to Jiuhua village, after investigation, it was found that there was clearly an ordinary person at the scene who was catalyzed by internal energy. Can this ordinary person have anything to do with the white Yujing in front of him? Even. Is it his mother? If so, everything seems to make sense. Feng Yebei did not startle the grass or the snake, but said to Bai Yujing, "Rest, I will come back to you later." Leaving behind a thoughtful Bai Yujing, Feng Yebei turned around with 3 subordinates and walked into the nearby room. "There is only Mr. Pei in this room. Did you hear me?" Feng Yebei asked. Pei Sanyi nodded and said, "I am not aware of this matter, and I am not quite sure about the movement of the hanging mountain." Feng Yebei didn't speak, and Su Jianghu beside him was obviously puzzled. He asked, "Third Lord, you are sitting in Fenyang City, and the entire Jingzhou is under your watchful eye. How could you not be clear about a mountain gate?" Pei Sanyi didn't seem to want to continue explaining this matter and said to Feng Yebei, "You came to me. How can I help you?" Feng Yebei smiled calmly and said, "You're not helping me." Pei Sanyi frowned and said, "Isn't it you?" "It's him," said Feng Yebei, pointing in the direction of the next room. Pei Sanyi was obviously surprised. "Who is he?" Feng Yebei said, "He may just be a struggling young man now, but if he can come back alive this time, he will be the first red-clothed envoy under my command." As soon as these words were spoken, the faces of the 3 green-clothed envoys behind him suddenly brightened up. Su Jianghu immediately said, "Boss, let me go with the investigation. I have never gone out alone to do anything." Feng Yebei looked at her and said, "Then you have to hurry up." Su Jianghu was taken aback and said, "Ah." Feng Yebei smiled and said, "That kid has already set off." Su Jianghu suddenly smiled and was about to turn around and run out, but was stopped by Feng Yebei. "When can you change your impatient temperament? When will you think of Jin Lanyi again?" Su Jianghu lowered his head, but a crescent moon had already formed at the corner of his mouth. "Keep an eye on that kid. He didn't tell me much truth, but I made a secret move and hid it in his sword, leaving behind the fragments of step by step. Feng Yebei raised his teacup and said softly, "If he's lying to me, then he naturally won't be able to practice stepping heavenly song. But," Tong Xiaofeng said inexplicably, "what if he didn't deceive you? If you want to take him into the embroidery clothes envoy, why should you give him such an incomplete martial arts book? When this step-by-step song was found, no one could practice it anymore. Isn't this contradictory? Just scrap and repair it, it's only a few years." Feng Yebei didn't say a word, but a hint of cunning flashed in his eyes. Then he smiled and stretched lazily, saying to Pei Sanyi, "Sanyi, this room money. I'll tie it." Mr. Pei didn't have a good expression and stood up with his hands behind his back, walking out. His plump stomach trembled as if complaining. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Bu Tiange. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Bu Tiange. The night is already deep. The dark clouds shrouded the entire sky, and half a bright moon that stretched its head out from the sky with all its might became the only light in Bai Yujing. Bai Yujing had already arrived outside the city, squatting on a resting ground, his thoughts disorganized. There were too many things and too much chaos, and he couldn't sort them out at all. He had to first check his body and see the sword in his hand. It's really beautiful. Baihan took a deep breath and stroked the smooth blade. The sparkling silver light and flowing patterns on it were enough to indicate that it must be a precious treasure. Slowly pulling out his long sword, even though he didn't use any strength in his hand, he still drew out his sword roar. Just this one moment excited Baihan, and he thought to himself, this sword is a weapon of revenge and a necessary item for wandering the world. Unfortunately, it's too ostentatious. We need to find a way. Got it. Baihan took off her clothes and then took out the entire sword. She cut her outer garment into a suitable sheath and strap, and after putting it in, it was just right. Only then did she enjoy the sword body with satisfaction. What is this? Surprisingly, there was a layer of sheepskin wrapped around the tip of the sword. Baihan took off the sheepskin and unfolded it, revealing some characters on it. He squinted his eyes and took a closer look, then subconsciously read, "Now I have recorded the 2 martial arts moves on this scroll. I hope that those who have obtained this scroll in the future can promote it." These 2 words are so blurry and cannot be seen clearly. Is it grand? This volume is divided into 2 volumes. The first volume is Stepping in the Sky Song, which is the method of cultivating immortality and martial arts. The second volume is Lotus Falling, which is the 18 moves of the Jiangnan ancient sword, with infinite power. Baihan was immediately overjoyed and read it carefully. After a while, he suddenly took a deep breath and thought to himself, although this stepping heavenly song is not complete, it is recorded in the book that it can reach 7 levels of martial arts and is still a path of dual cultivation of immortality in martial arts. I don't know if this road is easy to walk. I have never encountered the path of immortality and martial arts before, and I have never heard of anyone who can cultivate both martial arts and immortality at the same time. Does this require a long time for me? Now that revenge is imminent, Baihan's heart will feel even more uncomfortable for one more day. Just as he was worried, a joyful laughter rang from his side. "What are you doing?" "Reading." Baihan was startled and quickly grabbed the sword edge, turning around and swinging it. However, the sword stopped in mid-air. It was not Baihan who stopped the sword, but 2 jade fingers that looked like green onions. Then, a graceful face appeared in front of him. Su Jianghu. Baihan quickly withdrew his sword without apologizing, complaining, "I was scared to death. If it weren't for your strength, this sword might have accidentally injured you." Pushi. Su Jianghu chuckled and said, "Your way of using the sword, if you want to harm someone, you may need to practice for a few more years." Baihan swallowed his saliva and said, "Why did you come?" Su Jianghu smiled and sat directly beside him. Baihan was somewhat surprised. Previously, I heard that the embroidery bureau was from Linen, Kyoto, and naturally felt that they were very noble. The clothes on their bodies were expensive, and Su Jianghu was a woman, so there was always a sense of distance hidden in her heart. Now, seeing her sitting directly next to her, I suddenly felt a good impression in my heart. As for me, I'm afraid you won't be able to think about it alone, so I'll come and see you. Su Jianghu tilted his head and glanced at the sheepskin in Baihan's hand, asking, "What's that?" Baihan's cheeks suddenly heated up, and he didn't know how to explain this matter. After all, this is also considered a treasure in his hand. If he were to directly tell others, "Hey, look at my martial arts skills," most likely, they will be directly slaughtered and taken away. But on second thought, the other party naturally had seen their own sword, how could they not have seen such treasures? This girl is already a free-spirited person. If I continue to be indecisive, wouldn't I be a man like man? So he immediately said, "This is a technique given to me by a friend, which records some martial arts moves and mental techniques." Su Jianghu widened his bright eyes and looked at him in surprise. After not saying a word for a while, he finally forced out a sentence. You don't even plan to deceive me. Ah. Baihan grew up in a village and has always been a person with his own responsibilities. When he was young, his mother taught him that people cannot lie. He had just told Feng Yebe a lot of fabricated and insidious things, which made him feel ashamed and embarrassed. At this moment, he was provoked again, feeling extremely embarrassed. He had intended to say, "I never lie," but now he can't say it. However, Jianghu did not continue to blackmail him about this matter. Instead, he said seriously, "Next time, remember that whether it's martial arts moves or mind technique secrets, even if others have seen and written them down, you cannot say that what you have in your hand is that thing. So, isn't it? Not lying is a good thing, but not lying all the time is foolish. Lying requires distinguishing people, understand?" Jianghu smiled. "Separate people." Baihan expressed confusion. "Nah." Jianghu sat upright and said to him, "There are 100 things that concern one's own interests. When it comes to 100 things, one must speak 100 things of panic. One cannot tell the truth to people they dislike, and not all to those they respect. When it comes to people they like, one cannot always tell the truth, but only to those they love the most." Baihan seems to have forgotten whether there is a moon tonight, but feels that the girl in front of her is the moon. He didn't understand if this feeling was the same as when Wang Ergu married the Sun family girl in the village, but unfortunately Wang Ergu had already died and he couldn't ask. "Oh." Baihan's face turned slightly red and she lowered her head. "So let me ask you, what is this?" "It's some martial arts secrets and mental techniques." "Huh, you really can't say it," Jianghu smiled. "Okay, I won't bully you anymore. After you get these things, why don't you quickly cultivate yourself?" "Hey." Baihan sighed and said, "This method describes the extremely slow progress of improvement, and it is also a method of cultivating both immortals and martial arts, which is even more difficult. Among them, there is also a need to open a star vein path and follow a star chart to construct a star official. Now that I have not avenged my revenge, my heart is filled with grief and anger. How can I have so much time to practice this method? I want to directly practice this sword technique, but I don't know what effect it will have." Jianghu nodded, not directly suppressing Baihan's enthusiasm. Instead, he stood up, like a gust of wind drifting into the open space not far in front of him, wielding his sword and backhand, floating like an immortal. Turning back, he said, "I can teach you about martial arts. Would you be willing to listen to me?" "Of course." Baihan stood up excitedly. "Okay, look at it." Jianghu stabbed his sword and pointed straight at the tree 10 steps away. With this sword piercing, the sound of the wind is like a knife. "How handsome." Baihan's cheeks turned slightly red and he couldn't help but applaud, saying, "Amazing, is this the martial arts?" "No, this is martial arts." "Do you understand what martial arts are?" Baihan shook her head. Entering the martial arts realm is called the 10 realms, where qi is elevated. If there is qi in the body, it can be classified as the 10 ranks. As soon as the words fell, Jianghu made the same move again, his sword pointed straight away, and a faint silver light ignited on his arm. In an instant, the tree 10 steps away was pierced through a hole. Baihan was stunned. The 9 realms of martial arts, where the body is quenched and the energy is infused, and the qi can be released like immortal spiritual energy, are called the 9 realms. This time, she still followed the same method, but this time the single sword hit the tree completely, causing it to break and fall. After collecting the sword, she lightly jumped with her small foot and approached Baihan, tilting her head and saying, "Now you understand the power of martial arts and mental techniques, right? If you don't enter the country, it will give you the sword moves of the sword immortal back then, and you won't be able to kill anyone, let alone face the people on the hanging mountain." Yujing sighed and said, revenge is not something that happens overnight. Su Jianghu said, actually, it can also happen overnight. Yujing's eyes suddenly lit up, how is it? Su Jianghu said, please beg me. If I were to come and call my master, it would be easy to find a small hanging mountain. Yujing's eyes became indifferent again, he sat down on the ground, forced himself to smile, and slowly said, I wanted to ask for help, so when I came out of the inn, I went to the government office in Fenyang City. Do you know what they told me? Su Jianghu fell silent. She didn't know what the government was saying, but she could guess the exact answer. Yujing took a deep breath and said, I don't want to slander the government, but what they said is indeed reasonable. Those who can kill everyone in a village are naturally the demons around them. The demons disguised themselves as Xiankong Mountain and invaded Jiuhua village. Now they have ordered Xiankong Mountain to find the demons, otherwise they will be fined silver. Punish silver. What an interesting punishment. Yujing has lost confidence in the 6 gates. Su Jianghu returned to the side of Yujing and whispered, don't think so. You should know that the largest official of the Shaoyang dynasty was the current Zaifu and the head of the Tiange pavilion. This Tiange pavilion is our embroidery commissioner. Since the embroidery commissioner has taken over this matter, the local government will not disclose it to outsiders, and the actions of the embroidery commissioner are absolutely confidential, so you naturally can't ask. Yujing remained discouraged and said in a deep voice, I hope so. He spread out the roll of parchment and, in front of Su Jianghu, planned to start practicing directly. Su Jianghu looked at Yujing's serious profile, and then saw the incredibly firm and resilient expression in his eyes. His face turned slightly red and he said, it's not possible here. If someone passes by, they will definitely be pregnant with your cultivation. Let's find a quiet place. Quiet. It's also good. Yujing nodded. Su Jianghu grabbed his arm with one hand, and the two of them ran lightly through the mountains and forests. The moonlight lit up a lot at an unknown time. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Zhou Tian Xing Do, Bu Tian Gu. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Zhou Tian Xing Do, Bu Tian Gu. A new moon, a high mountain, a low rock, a new spring, an ancient locust tree, a new campfire, a pot of turbid wine, a boy, a girl. Su Jianghu always found the best place to hide herself, which was her innate ability. If it weren't for this ability, she would have died in the cold winter of war with her parents as early as the age of 4. This place is very beautiful, suitable for rest, cultivation, and also suitable for seeing handsome guys. Su Jianghu likes to see handsome young men very much. After taking a break, she rarely stays in the Tiange pavilion and often goes out, pretending to be a little beggar and squatting on the street, looking at the wealthy young masters on the 8-legged sedan chairs, or sneaking into the military camp to see those handsome young generals. She always felt that those who could stand tall in Kyoto were handsome, and to this day, she saw a person 10,000 times more handsome than those people, which was Yujing in front of her. Perhaps if he were born into those aristocratic families in the capital, would he also be a shining star in the future? Su Jianghu couldn't help but speculate that the girl's spring heart was always in an accidental and uncontrollable state. At the age of 4, war not only took the lives of her parents, but also of her brother. She once thought that the most handsome person in the world was her brother, but now that times have changed, she has been slightly shaken by this once unwavering belief. She knew that she wouldn't fall in love with anyone, it was just her only hobby. Hobbies don't need to be responsible, she just needs to watch and make herself comfortable, and loving someone is responsible. She cannot take responsibility. Because there is also a deep-seated hatred in her chest. This is also the reason why she joined the embroidery bureau. The 100-year-old foundation of the Shaoyang dynasty was always sabotaged by a group of forces who sabotaged it. The war at the age of 4 was also caused by their efforts and destruction. White Lotus sect, with 12 floors and 5 cities. The White Lotus sect is an organization, and the 12th floor and 5 cities are their homes. Su Jianghu understood that one day she would find this mysterious and massive organization, and one day she would fall into a deadly battle with them, so she had no ability to love anyone. She can only watch. Look at his robust physique and muscular physique, his fair skin and slightly reddened body after the upper body's breathing. His Su Jianghu quickly wiped her lips and let out a hee-hee smile. She held her sword, hid her face behind the blade, and quietly looked at him. Soon, her gaze was drawn to something unusual, and as her eyebrows furrowed, she reluctantly shifted her gaze away from his chest and placed it on his arm. Suddenly, Bai Yujing's body ignited an inexplicable aura. Su Jianghu didn't know what had happened, but after so many years of cultivation, she knew something was wrong. She immediately jumped up to Bai Yujing and sat down cross-legged with him, pressing one hand on his sturdy chest and nervously saying, "What's wrong?" Bai Yujing was frightened to open his eyes by the sudden care, but after the palm of his hand, which was as soft as white flower mantle, was pressed on him, he felt a heat flow into his body, and was much more comfortable, explaining. "Nothing. Nothing." Bai Yujing did not show off his strength, but Su Jianghu did not believe it, so he said, "I want to spy on your dantian." Dantian. What is dantian? Bai Yujing was stunned for a moment. In the cultivation of martial arts, the foundation of martial arts lies in the introverted dantian chi type. What is dantian? Su Jianghu became a little anxious and stopped asking. He immediately breathed qi into his heart meridian, peered at it, and the whole person was stunned. Miss Su, what's wrong with you?" Bai Yujing stopped when she noticed the strange breath entering her body, and couldn't help but ask. This. Su Jianghu was unable to explain for a moment, unable to say a word. What she saw inside was not the ordinary way of practicing qi and qi after internal restraint in dantian, but the sky is full of stars. Bai Yujing's body is like a cloudless night sky, with 3 very bright stars shining on the entire earth under the night sky, and this so-called earth is his body. Bai Yujing looked at her in confusion and asked in a low voice, "What's wrong, Miss Su? Is there a problem with my cultivation method?" Su Jianghu never expected such a situation. He immediately grabbed the book Stepping Heavenly Song with his other hand and pointed to the handwriting on it, asking, "Let me ask you, why do you structure your dantian like this? How should your dantian gather energy?" Dantian. Why construct dantian? Bai Yujing still didn't know why, but this time he smiled gently and said, "The first sentence in this book is to use the method of planetary struggle in the Zhou Tian to construct the Zhou Tian, supplement the internal deficiency with external strength, and use external strength to supply the internal deficiency. He is accustomed to supporting the heavenly movement and promoting the Zhou Tian." Wrong. Su Jianghu said sternly, "The architecture of the Zhou Tian is based on the dantian." But the word dantian was not mentioned in the book. Looking at Bai Yujing's face, Su Jianghu was completely stunned. "That's right." He muttered to himself, "You're right, you haven't mentioned it before. Why build a structure within the dantian? The first way to practice is to gather qi in the dantian, which has always been the case. Always like this. Is that right?" Bai Yujing asked again. "Is it right to always be like this?" Su Jianghu couldn't explain this sentence for a moment. Right. Is it wrong to be difficult? Is it possible that the reason why Butian Gu has not been successful in circulation to this day is that it has always been like this? Bai Yujing said in a slow voice, "When I construct my entire body, according to the second sentence, I construct the Zhou Tian based on the 3 walls of the stars. This is the beginning of constructing the inner palace." Su Jianghu said in a daze, "How to structure it? How do you know where to build the 3 walls?" Bai Yujing smiled and said, "Didn't the first sentence be written? When it comes to supplementing internal deficiency with external strength, it means using blood to nourish qi in medical skills. So, when external strength is used to supply internal deficiency, it means that qi and blood are interconnected. The last thing that is used to supporting the heavens is bone, isn't it? So, qi and qi, blood and flesh, and the last one is bone. That's right. Baiyujing closed his eyes and seemed to be vigorously thrusting his entire body. The 3 bright stars in the sky inside his body suddenly lit up. He smiled and said, "This is to travel around the world," referring to the connection of these 3 imperial meridians. He continued, "In the 3rd sentence of the text, the 3 walls of the emperor's veins run through the center, the Ziwei wall is in the center, the Taiwei wall is on the left, and the Tianche wall is on the right. Rotate them to divide into 4 statues. The eastern Songlong, the southern vermilion bird, the western white tiger, and the northern Xuanwu." Su Jianghu no longer dared to express his own opinions and asked, "What does this mean?" Baiyujing smiled and said, "These are the 4 phenomena collectively referred to in the book as the 3 walls, for symbols, 9 yao, and 28 constellations. Each of them contains 7 star power points, also known as star acupoints, corresponding to the 28 constellations. I then followed the first structure and deduced that the 4 phenomena are the hands and feet, and the 7 stars are the 7 acupoints on the hands and legs." Su Jianghu said, "So? Only repairing arms? How is the structure of the inner palace structured?" Baiyujing chuckled and said to herself, "I'm afraid this structure is well known to everyone, and Miss Su is afraid of dampening my enthusiasm. She's showing a lack of understanding when she comes to test me. Her ability to do so is already excellent to me. Her kindness must be repaid if there is a chance." Immediately, he spoke incessantly. The first sentence has just been spoken, which is to say, after all the 4 phenomena and 20.8 star constellations are opened, the Eastern Azure Dragon 7 constellations and the Western White Tiger 7 constellations with both hands, the Southern Vermilion Bird 7 constellations and the Northern Xuanwu 7 constellations with both legs, will all converge to the position of Inner Mansion. This position exists in the Taiwei Yuan and the Tianche Yuan, and finally, after reconciliation, will converge to the Purple Wei Yuan. A few words were spoken directly to Su Jianghu, who was momentarily stunned. She asked after her, "So? How do we store our breath? And how do we release our martial or spiritual energy?" Baiyujing smiled and said, "Storing breath is everywhere in the body. The Zhou Tian star dough transforms the body into a sky full of stars, and each bloodline is the medium for storing breath. By entering the acupoints, merging the acupoints into the veins, and the veins running through the 3 Yuan Emperor's veins, construction can be achieved." He thought for a moment and said, "It's more interesting to release it. After the 3 Yuan Imperial vein condenses the aura and martial energy, it will form 9 star positions. Then, it will take stars from the 28 constellations to enter the body, which will form Jiuyao. This Jiuyao is the key to release the martial energy or the aura." Baiyujing can clearly articulate the logic, but cannot perfectly demonstrate the process of the formation of Jiuyao. After all, it is still in the beginner stage, and a lot of practice is needed to become proficient and even integrate. Su Jianghui's face was full of surprise, but she hid it in her bright eyes. After blinking a few times, she realized the seriousness of the situation and smiled, saying, "You really understand well, but I have to warn you of something. You must remember." Baiyujing listened sincerely. "No matter who, except for me and Feng Yebe, who is the leader, who asks you, you are not allowed to say these things. Do you understand?" Baiyujing nodded. Su Jianghu rubbed his stomach and said, "I'm hungry, are you hungry?" Baiyujing smiled slightly ashamed and said, I'm a bit hungry." Su Jianghu snapped his fingers and said, "Wait for me, I'll go find some food." As he spoke, he jumped up without any hesitation and headed straight for Fenyang City. Bai Yujing doesn't have many ideas, so she continues to build her own Zhou Tian structure. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Because you are handsome. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Chapter 10. Because you are handsome. When Feng Yebei jumped up from the bed, wine spilled all over the ground. This time, Su Jianghu finally confirmed his own judgment. This is an extraordinary thing. Because the last time Feng Yebei jumped out of bed was the year when the late emperor passed away. That year, she was only 7 years old. At least one thing can be concluded, that this matter is heavyweight compared to the death of the late emperor. Feng Yebei quickly blinked his eyes for more than a dozen times, staring at Su Jianghu and asking in confusion, "Is this what he said?" Su Jianghu said confidently, "Boss, you know I always deliver messages word for word, how could there be any problems?" Feng Yebei squatted on the bed, with his knees pressed up, his hands resting on them, his fingers spread out, and his fingers facing each other. This is his usual way of thinking, and once this state arises, it indicates something. Even if the emperor dies again now, don't bother me. Su Jianghu followed him for more than a decade, naturally understanding his habits, and immediately retreated to the side, waiting silently. It took him an unknown amount of time before his feet landed on the ground, and he slowly asked, "What kind of breath is inside him?" Su Jianghu shook his head and said, "I didn't see any breath in his body. Moreover, it seems that he hasn't entered the country yet." Feng Yebei nodded slowly. This action was very slow, as if time had been choked by someone, and blood was squeezing through the small blood vessels at a speed. Su Jianghu asked in a low voice, "Boss, is this his own opinion? Is it possible that he has already participated in and broken through the song, Stepping to the Sky?" Feng Yebei said, "No, this is not his own opinion, but the correct one." When Wei Taisher handed over this secret technique to Zun Shang, he had already explained the theory of this technique. This kid almost completely expressed the correct opinion. Su Jianghu said, "Is it possible that his ancestors have been exposed to the stepping heavenly song?" "No, it's not true. These secret techniques have been living in the deep palace for a long time. If it weren't for our embroidery envoy or the high-ranking officials of the Imperial Academy, even the royal family would have never seen them." Feng Yebei smiled and lay in bed, casually throwing out a token, whispering, "There are only two possibilities now. Firstly, this kid is a peerless genius. Based solely on his own perspective, he can see the mystery of stepping heavenly song. Moreover, he may also compose such secrets in their original form." Feng Yebei took the wine by the side of his bed and shook it, saying, "Secondly, this kid is an incredibly foolish fool. He has leaked one of the biggest secrets in the palace and also exposed himself and the person who may have helped him in the palace. If this person exists, it is very likely that his secrets will continue to leak out." He turned his head to look at Su Jianghu and asked, "What do you think?" Su Jianghu had already understood the leader's meaning, but had to follow his words. After all, leaders like face and pretend to be smart and understand everything. So what else should leaders do? So he asked, "What if it's the first one? I will give him another test, and once it passes, this token will become his new identity. No matter how much trouble he makes in the Hanging Mountain, I will hold it." Su Jianghu asked again, "What if it's the second type? Kill him." Feng Yebei pressed his tongue against his upper jaw and made a loud click. Su Jianghu picked up the token and respectfully said, "I understand." Then he jumped out with joy. After the girl disappeared, Feng Yebei looked around to make sure she wouldn't come back, and quickly coughed. A dozen or so girls dressed sparsely walked out of the restroom with laughter. "Oh, it scared us to death." "Don't be scared, little lady, you miss me so much." Feng Yebei hugged 3 of them and immersed himself in the gentle countryside. The structure of the Zhou Tianqing diagram is a very tedious task, but Bai Yujing understands that such complexity only occurs in the early stages. Once entering formal cultivation, the already structured Zhou Tianqing diagram will make future cultivation more efficient and efficient. This is like digging a canal in a dry place. The initial difficulties are unimaginable, but once the moment of water supply arrives, all the hard work and effort are worth it. During the architecture process, Baiyujing discovered something even more bizarre. When constructing the 3 Yuan emperor's lineage, he only spent half an hour, but it was surprisingly difficult to open up the 4 symbols network. The first acupoint he opened was the Qinglong 7 meridians. At the beginning, the first acupoint was relatively simple, but by the second point, he almost exhausted all his strength to stimulate it. By the third point, no matter what the structure was, he could not complete the flushing of the acupoint. The star acupoint was like a bottomless dry well, and he seemed to be planning to use urine to fill it. Afterwards, Baiyujing did not choose to stubbornly kowtow, but instead turned to cultivate the other 4 meridians. The result is still the same. One night, he only opened 8 star holes, which consumed his mind and energy, and he was almost unconscious. When he rushed through Xuanwu's second star hole, he felt that his clothes were soaked in sweat, his eyes were filled with stars, and his whole body was limp and powerless. He immediately fell asleep without hesitation, snoring like thunder. When Baiyujing woke up, it was already noon the next day. He wiped his face and lazily stretched his waist. This was the most comfortable and reliable sleep he had had in 19 years, and his exhaustion was swept away. His mood also improved a lot. As soon as I woke up, I entered a state of cultivation again and constructed the 3rd star hole of each meridian. Su Jianghu had more than a dozen buns, a pot of water, and a bundle in her hand, and she had also changed into a new outfit. She was no longer the Shaoyang green clothes envoy, but rather the clothes of a Taoist disciple. When Luozhua walked over, he did not disturb Baiyujing. Judging from his rosy complexion and steady breathing, he knew he had slept for a while and sat directly in front of him, spreading out the things in his hand. Although Baiyujing did not open his eyes, he knew that Su Jianghu had arrived. He was very sensitive to the sound of footsteps, which was also his experience of walking in the mountains and forests all year round. Every time he set traps to catch wild animals, he would hide in the treetops and hide his figure. He could only distinguish what was coming and who was coming by listening to the sound. Over time, not only could he distinguish the approximate person coming by the sound of footsteps, but he could also determine whether they were carrying other things. His ears seemed to have been the greatest gift from heaven. Unable to break through the 3rd star hole, Baiyujing gave up and instead continued to improve the structure of the Zhou Tian stars. The rest was no longer cumbersome, but a bridge connecting several star holes, penetrating the breath from the 4 symbols into the 3 Yuan emperor's veins. This process is referred to as Zhou Tian Xing Qi in Bu Tian Gu, or in layman's terms, it is a small Zhou Tian. Starting from the 3 Yuan emperor pulse, walking through each star position, penetrating the entire body with the breath, practicing and washing the blood of the star position pulse, in order to achieve the method of cultivation. The entire process took a full hour, until finally returning to the 3 Yuan emperor pulse, it was considered a small Zhou Tian. After finishing, although he was still sweating profusely, he didn't feel tired all over. Instead, he felt refreshed and even more prominent when he just woke up. He didn't feel any sense of fatigue at all. Baiyujing thought to himself, this practice is indeed very beneficial. Now that my body is going to collect medicine, I can do it 10 or 8 times a day without any problem. Thinking of this, Baiyujing sighed. Is picking herbs still useful? My mother has already left, and I have embarked on the path of revenge. The journey of the martial arts world is long, and the path of immortality is smooth. Who knows how long I can live? Hello. How long will you be feeling down there? Su Jianghu tilted his head and pulled Baiyujing out of his sorrowful thoughts. His smile remained like a spring breeze, and he said angrily, the breakfast I bought for you is getting cold. Upon hearing breakfast, Baiyujing's stomach immediately became hungry and he immediately took big bites of steamed buns. The ancients once said that being able to eat is a blessing, and those who can eat are those who have goals. It is likely that the goals of Baiyujing are hatred. When Su Jianghuai saw that he could eat, his mood relaxed a bit, but when he thought of the leader's words, he couldn't help but feel a little worried. Although she didn't know how the boss should assess Baiyujing, looking back on the past, she couldn't help feeling a bit discouraged. The investigation of Fengyuan North has never been passed in the past decade, and the last time it was passed was by the two brothers of the Tong family. In the Tiange pavilion where the embroidered clothes commissioner was located, there was a person named Zun Shang, followed by 3 black-clothed envoys, 5 purple-clothed envoys, and 12 blue-clothed and 50 or so blue-clothed envoys. The remaining green and red-clothed envoys were as abundant as a cow's hair. Of course, this is the data on the surface, and there are countless hidden dangers hidden in the court and the martial arts world. In summary, the number of red guards is the highest. However, within this overall framework, the black-clad envoy was directly responsible to the emperor of the Shaoyang dynasty, and his identity was hidden in daily life, making it impossible to see him. Therefore, the largest embroidery envoy under the leadership of the superior was the purple-clad envoy, who was in charge of blue clothes were in charge of blue clothes, green clothes were in charge of green clothes, and green clothes were in charge of red clothes. In theory, the number of subordinates of the 5 purple-clothed envoys should be similar, but unfortunately, there are only 3 subordinates under Feng Yebei, namely Su Jianghuai and the Tong family brothers. No matter what others say or even if the Supreme Emperor personally requests, he never accepts anyone. This sudden exception demonstrates the uniqueness of this Baiyujing. It is feared that this person has solved the problem here. After passing the leader's review, bringing this person into linen will cause a considerable sensation. Su Jianghuai wanted to remind Baiyujing not to miss this opportunity to leap into the world of dragons and phoenixes, but after thinking about it, he still dared not make an exception to notify him. After all, as long as you abide by his rules, you can do anything else you want. Su Jianghuai dare not break the rules. When Baiyujing finished eating, Su Jianghuai tilted his head and asked tentatively, "Do you want revenge?" Baiyujing stared at Su Jianghuai, not understanding the meaning of her words, and said in confusion, "What does Miss Su mean?" Su Jianghuai smiled and said, "I want to help you." Baiyujing said, "Thank you for Miss Su's kindness. I have said that I must avenge this on my own." Su Jianghuai said, "You're just going to kill that Yaxuzi yourself, but before that, you still have a lot of things to deal with. Otherwise, not to mention killing Yaxuzi, you wouldn't even be able to meet him." Of course, Baiyujing has thought about this matter more than once, and there is indeed no foolproof solution. So he asked, "Do you have a good solution?" Su Jianghuai nodded and said, "Not only do I have a good way, but I can also make it easy for you to see him." Baiyujing stared intently at Su Jianghuai and said, "Why are you helping me?" Su Jianghuai smiled and said, "Because you are handsome." End of this chapter.